Society for many years has been trying to deal with the problems of transportation and energy. Well, right here today, we have the solutions with Steve Marshall from the Center for Advanced Transportation and Energy Solutions. Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So, and I got to say thank you from a citizen standpoint for coming to the conclusions that you're coming to with regard to transportation and energy. It's always nice to bring solutions, huh?
Good, good. Happy to do it.
So tell us about the center. I think the acronym is CATES.
It is. We created this a few years ago, John Niles and myself, to look at the emerging disruptive technologies that were coming together in transportation and with an energy component. Moving from oil to electricity, moving to faster, greener, safer vehicles that are connected, increasingly autonomous. And the idea was to try to figure out, well, how could you bring these things together in a way under a public policy roadmap that helped to integrate them and to accelerate them. So that's why we formed it, and we're working hard to make that happen.
So essentially you guys are a think tank?
We are. We're a think and, as John says, do tank. So we're trying not only to think and put out papers and hold conferences and do studies, but also to work with legislators and with others to develop the kind of legislation, the kind of approaches that you need to make this happen.
Are they listening?
Well, they are. They are. It's good. But like so many things, the technologies are coming so fast and they have the power to disrupt that a lot of folks have to be brought on board with actual demonstrations. So one of the things we're trying to focus on is how do you do large-scale demonstration projects to show that what we're talking about can actually happen and be safe, be greener, be faster, and more convenient.
If the public who's watching, how do they know that you know what you're talking about?
I don't know if they do. I think the proof will be in what we can put out. But my background is in utilities. John's is in transportation. I started out as chief counsel to Puget Sound Power Light Company, went up to help Snohomish PUD battle Enron and help reform the Bonneville Power Administration. So I headed up power transmission conservation. And at that time found out about the emerging technology of electric vehicles, which I thought at first was going to be a problem, a headache in trying to figure out how do you power these vehicles and how do you get utilities to do enough planning so that they can meet those challenges. What I found out is that actually it's a great opportunity. By moving from oil to electricity, you can make the grid more efficient, you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and in this state you can make the powering of vehicles much cheaper.
I'm going to be really excited to talk about the electric vehicles and the green highway and all of the things that you talk about, but I got to ask you this. How do you battle Enron?
Well, in battling Enron, it was a lot of work to try to get us out of the bankruptcy court that Enron eventually fell into, where creditors and people who are debtors have a hard time. It was in New York. So we worked with Senator Cantwell and others to do what became known as the Cantwell Amendment that put us before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And there we had a real chance to show that what Enron had done was not legal or appropriate under federal energy law. And it worked. We got out from underneath that rock.
Now let's get into CATES and some of the solutions that you are advocating. Talk about an electric highway and a green highway, but it all relates to one thing, and that is reducing dependence upon oil, not foreign oil, but just oil. Is that right?
That's correct. And it's interesting because in our economy, one of the last things to be moving from traditional types of fuel to electricity is transportation. Almost everything is run by electricity except for vehicles. 97% of all transportation is oil-based. Gasoline, diesel, and so forth, natural gas to some small degree. So if you're looking to make a big dent in our oil use, which we need to do, moving from oil to electricity and transportation is the one area where you can do it. And in our state, because we've got such a clean grid, it's mostly carbon neutral or carbon free already, thanks to our hydropower system, thanks to the one nuclear power plant that we have here, and increasing solar and wind. So the most good that people can do if they want to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions is to move from a gasoline car to a plug-in electric vehicle.
Can I ask you this? Is there agreement around the world now that there does need to be a reduction on dependence on oil?
Well, there is, and I think most countries have realized that one of the chief things that you have to do to address greenhouse gas emissions, which is a worldwide effort now, is to reduce it in transportation. In our state, most of the transportation greenhouse gases are the biggest part of greenhouse gas emissions. You add everything up together, and it doesn't equal what you produce with transportation in our state. Worldwide, it's less, and we're ahead of the curve because again, our grid is so much cleaner, carbon-free. But around the world, there are really only 2, maybe 3 words that you have to know about in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's coal, it's oil, and it's the natural gas. So if you're going to reduce fossil fuel use, you've got to address what you're going to do with coal, what are you going to do with replacing oil, and then eventually replacing natural gas, which is seen right now as kind of a bridge to reduce coal use and reduce some oil use. But eventually, if you want to get to that kind of a neutral position, you've got to deal with that as well.
So the discussion over clean coal versus unclean coal, I guess, is almost moot.
Well, it's difficult, as it turned out, to do the capturing and sequestration of greenhouse gas emissions from coal. It turned out to be a much tougher task. A laboratory could show that you could do it, but large-scale sequestration is very hard to do, very expensive to do. So it doesn't look like that's going to work out very well.
So you conduct conferences or certainly participate in lead conferences with regard to the future of oil, but it's really the future of transportation and energy, isn't it?
It is, yes, definitely. And again, we're not just focused on greenhouse gas emissions and the environment. We're looking at how do you do smarter, faster, safer transportation, as well as having it be greener. And if you don't put all those together, if you don't make it less expensive, you're really not going to get to where you want to go.
Well, that comes up to the next question, and that is anytime that there is a discussion of environmental sustainability, now that E word has changed from environment to economic. So is a reduction on oil in transportation economically sustainable?
It really is, and that's one of the things that hasn't gotten much publicity. In this state, for example, we spend $16 billion a year on imported oil. We don't produce any of our own oil. So, and it's more than what we spend on K through 12 education. It's a huge amount. We spend about 10 or 11 billion on K through 12 education. So it's a hit to our economy. We send that money out of the state. By contrast, we have our own production of hydropower here within the state's boundaries. So you can save a lot of money. And the comparison between what it costs for an equivalent gallon of gas at $3.84 in our state is about 84 cents a gallon for electricity if you do the equivalency. So right away you can see that you can save money.
Yeah, I mean $3 a gallon, that's a lot.
Right.
But how does that work? How can you help me understand that, someone who doesn't understand math very well?
You can translate all energy into barrel per oil equivalent or kilowatt hour equivalent or British thermal unit equivalent. So once you convert all this production of electricity or production of fuel for operating cars, you do the standard comparisons based on converting everything to a single standard and then looking at that. In fact, the biggest problem with energy conservation is we measure it right now in kilowatt hours saved. We don't look at it in terms of what can you save if you could save oil. So if you replace electricity, basically use that to figure out how do you get away from oil, you should be taking a look at how do you convert everything to kilowatt hours or barrel of oil or BTU equivalents. And then ask, well, what's the energy savings that you get, the net energy savings? And in our state, of course, if you save money by kilowatt hours, you're not really reducing much in greenhouse gas emissions because we're so low on those anyway when we produce the power. But you save a lot if you move to electricity from oil.
Right here on Public Exposure, we're talking with Steve Marshall, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Advanced Transportation and Energy Solutions. And yes, they indeed are solutions, and they are intermixed. We strongly encourage you to go to the website and learn a lot more. It's up on the screen, and we will be showing that several times throughout the show. We talked about problem one, oil dependence. But there's a second problem that you talk about, and that's collisions. But that doesn't have anything to do with oil, or does it?
It really doesn't, although right now what we're trying to figure out is how do you have cars without oil, without accidents, and without congestion. And what's happening is the convergence of the technologies that help produce the move from oil to electricity in just the kinds of vehicles that are being produced also enable the vehicles to be connected, not only to other infrastructure, other vehicles, but to utilities for advanced charging at optimum times. So the whole network, which is becoming known as the mobility internet, where you're looking at the confluence of technologies, not only on the oil side, but on the smart connected car side, are giving us the opportunity to really transform transportation all the way around. So you can have cars that are greener, safer, faster, more affordable than the current cars that we have right now. And by cars, I mean every type of vehicle, from small cars to pickup trucks and delivery trucks. Maybe not the 18-wheelers, but almost everything.
I'm hearing technology in what you talk about. But there's the other part, is the people who produce the cars, the people who drill for oil and then sell it on the corner. Essentially at the corner gas station. They're not ready to accept what you're saying, though, are they?
Well, actually, it turns out that the auto companies have embraced this much faster than I think people thought. GM came out with the Chevy Volt long before there was the presidential election. They were working on this before a lot of the incentives came out in order to figure out what do you do to diversify away from oil. Ford, GM, Toyota, BMW. If you look at the latest movies involving Mission Impossible and so forth, you're looking at the BMW high-end vehicles that have outperformed anything around. So it's a performance as well as a diversity issue away from fuels that could become, if not hard to find in the future, at least a lot more expensive. I think at first companies were a little bit reluctant to get into this, but once they saw Tesla making these vehicles, once they saw some others doing it, now we have competition that is wide open. 2 years ago, basically only two cars, the Volt and the Nissan Leaf. Now there's a couple of dozen available for people to choose from.
Well, we've seen technology move us as a society so fast in just the past several years alone. I mean, we don't need to talk about 20 years, we just talk about the last 5 years. I think you were talking before the show about writing an article in, I think, 2008, and that was at a time when smartphones didn't exist.
Well, that's right, and it's instructed to look at smartphones that came in about 6 years ago and think about the processing power, the connection to the internet and the cloud, all the information, all the apps that we can get. They're making all of this a lot more possible, a lot faster than I think people thought, including autonomous self-driving cars, which are another factor that we're working on.
We definitely have to get to that. One of the other problems you talked about, so far we talked about oil dependence, we talked about collisions, we talked a little bit about congestion, but we also talk about the underutilization of public transit. I have to tell you, I don't use public transit in this city. Because it doesn't go where I want it to go. And the buses are slow and dirty. The trains, again, they just don't, I mean, even to go to the airport, it's too far for me to walk. I'm going to take a cab and I'll just, then they'll let me out at the airport. So I can't use it anymore.
Well, it's definitely a problem. The underutilization in public transit means that we have more congested highways. So one of the key questions is, how do you get people to have other options that are really good from door to door, that will get them where they want to go at the times they want to go? In downtown Seattle, you have a hub and spoke system, which works pretty well for people who live in that corridor, north and south of the city. But on the east side and farther north and farther south, it's more like pickup sticks. People are going every which direction. And a lot of our major employers live outside the city limits, Boeing and Microsoft and REI and Costco and so forth. You can name a whole bunch of iconic companies. So how do you get people to those places? Part of the solution are van pools, where King County Metro is working on getting more of those. They're becoming more opportunities for electric Nissan Leaf van pools and Via Motor type van pools.
Really?
Which is pretty neat. But the idea is, how do you create these more high-tech, intelligent transportation hubs where you can do social networking and the scheduling software to enable people to do flexible van pools where they can find a number of people fast. It's kind of like Car2Go, working with the transit systems. But the peak, trying to solve the peak, trying to get people where they need to go fast and greener is a key. So I agree, it's tough because cars will get people where they want to go, when they want to go, and get them fairly quickly. But if everybody just drove cars, we would have a congested mass. So how do you get people out of the hubs?
But just about everybody does drive cars, though, I mean, realistically.
Well, at commute times into downtown Seattle, there's a healthy percentage that commute by public transit. And even on the east side, there's about 17% that go into Bellevue by public transportation. But you're right, I think overall, even the public entities that are looking at this, the Puget Sound Regional Council, believes by 2040 there might be only about 6 to 10% of the total transportation trips taken by public transit. So what do you do about the other 90% is the key.
Yeah. I have to ask this, with more and more people working out of their homes, more and more companies saying it's okay for you to have your own technology and stay, at your home, is congestion just something to talk about and it's not truly a future problem?
I think it'll be a future problem. We continue to find people wanting to get together, even at Microsoft, which of course you would think could do a lot of telecommuting. They encourage people to come to meet other people, to exchange ideas. Same thing you've probably heard about a number of other companies, Yahoo and some others that don't want telecommuting. Telecommuting has a role, but will it be a significant role, or will you still need face-to-face communication to really advance the kind of thinking that high-tech companies and the creative folks need to have done? I don't really have a good idea on how much telecommuting will happen in the future. I kind of like being able to be in a distant city and still be connected by voicemail and by internet. But at the end of the day, you're going to find that we're still going to need to have cities with large capacity to move a lot of people every day.
Let's talk about the future now, because this is also something that you talk about an awful lot at the Center for Advanced Transportation and Energy Solutions. By the way, Steve Marshall, who is the executive director of that organization, is with us. Be sure to go to the website that's up on the screen. Reinventing the automobile is one of the very first things that you talk about. And we've talked a little bit about it here, but you kind of snuck in something on me, and that was the self-driving.
Right.
That would be great. I don't like to drive anyway.
It is an amazing thing. If you look at a Google site, and there's a fellow by the name of Steve Mahan, gets in a Google self-driving car. It turns out after he's gotten a taco and he's not touching the steering wheel and he gets some dry cleaning that he's blind. And he says, this is some of the best driving I've ever done. Well, the people at Google think that self-driving cars will be on the market in 5 years. People we're working with say it's more like 10. But 10 years isn't very long.
No.
To put it in perspective, Eastlink over to Bellevue light rail will be done in 2023, 10 years from now. So within 10 years, we're going to be having cars at least that will have a lot of the capacity to be self-driving. Now, between now and then, you're going to have vehicles that won't collide rear end with other ones, that won't shift lanes. They're available now in Volvos and Fords and Cadillacs and so forth. You'll have cars that can, under a certain speed limit, drive you safely following other vehicles on the interstates. And eventually, probably in that 10-year time frame, you'll be able to get in a car and go to San Francisco, San Diego, and shoot down in a group of other vehicles at 80, 90 miles an hour without having to worry about hitting other vehicles. So will that happen? Well, the processing power, the smartphone applications, the creation of the interrelated technologies is happening so fast that I think that will happen.
Wow. I mean, I know you're not an engineer, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but this is so cool. I got to ask, how do those things work?
Well, they work in different ways. I mean, there are a combination of technologies. There's radar technologies to prevent the rear ending. There's what they call LiDAR using laser. There's a combination with Google Maps where you have GPS systems overlaid with Google Maps where they've done everything. There are cameras that are really cheap that look at stop signs and stop lights and pedestrians. So you put all those together with the kind of computing power that you now have, the processing power in real time, you can get vehicles that are pretty safe, and eventually they might be as smart as a horse used to be.
So I can actually get in my car, or I'm expecting to be able to get in my car and say, let's go to Grandma's house. And it'll take me there?
In fact, you can kind of whistle the car, in effect, by calling the car to come out of the garage and pick you up and then take you
gosh. This really is Star Trek, isn't it?
It really is. And, we would have thought a lot of things were unreal here 5-6 years ago with smartphones again and other things. So is this out of range? It might take a little bit longer than people think, but eventually it'll be here.
Now, the shock to the system is something that I get concerned about. And I'm not talking about the technological system, I'm talking about the social system. Mm-hmm. An interesting thing, if we were to look back on the life of a 90-year-old today, mm-hmm. who would go back to his or her youth, the world was so incredibly difficult. And mm-hmm. they're not doing real well in dealing with all of the changes.
Right.
And when we're 90, are we going to be able to deal with the changes that are happening?
Well, I think so. My dad's 89, and he's looking forward to being able to drive in a car that will drive him. His father, my grandfather, used to be able to get on a horse after a grange dance, tie his wrist to the saddle, and have the horse take him home when he slept, so he could get up early the next morning. So will this be disruptive? I think it won't be. I think it'll be safer. We're still killing about 30,000 people a year on our roads. This will do a lot to reduce that. It'll be greener because you can make the cars lighter. They don't have to be quite as beefy to avoid collisions. And that has a lot of other benefits. So will this be more or less disruptive than what other changes have happened? It'll probably be one of those things like the computer. It will displace a lot of other technologies, but people will say, gosh, I wish they invented that earlier.
Yeah. Now, this is likely going to have some congressional intervention, if not participation. Mm-hmm. Where are they on these types of technologies and their true implementation?
Well, Congress was pretty good early on about helping with incentives for electric vehicles, realizing that it would be good to have some federal income tax credits, some available money to loan to companies. So Ford and Nissan got loans, Tesla got loans, which they repaid, by the way, 9 years early under the Bush administration. A lot of this was passed early on. Most people don't realize that. And then, of course, it got accelerated some by the Department of Energy trying to figure out what the EV project, what will people need by way of charging stations. So Congress has helped out a lot. Now with autonomous vehicles, with trying to figure out how to do self-driving cars, I think people are now trying to figure out, well, how do we roll that into the overall system? And that's going to take a combination of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the EPA, U.S. Department of Transportation, and even HUD. And they're working together, ironically or interestingly enough, in trying to figure out, well, how could we create a large-scale demonstration project? And one of the things we're trying to do out here in the Northwest is work with HUD, EPA, the Department of Defense, with Joint Base Lewis-McChord, with other areas to figure out, can we figure what sort of communication systems, what sort of large-scale networking that needs to be done, make the standards more uniform test out some of the different approaches here on a large scale basis. So you take Joint Base Lewis McChord, which has a big problem with transportation through that I-5 corridor. Wouldn't it be nice to get more of the troops and contractors out of their vehicles and into some of the vehicles that are electric and then eventually self-driving? Not only there, but on the base to move people around, which the Department of Defense is interested in doing for other reasons. Then how do you hook that up to the utilities? Tacoma Power supplies the power there. To make it so that you have good backup power. You have the cars that can provide critical mission circuit backup power. So one of the things we're trying to figure out is how could we do a large-scale public policy roadmap to test out some of these things so people have confidence that this will actually work. Because I think part of it's just going to be, are people going to be nervous about getting in a vehicle that can theoretically drive itself? Will they figure it's safe enough and reliable enough? And you only get there if you can show that it's been tested out by some institutions that are trustworthy enough to be able to prove to folks that it works.
And so again, the self-driving car is not science fiction. It's actually fact today. It exists. It's just not publicly available.
Right. Google cars have gone about 500,000 miles without an accident, with one exception. Somebody rear-ended that vehicle, so it wasn't its fault. And other companies are making them, and they're being tested out by the Department of Defense as well. So we're having, I don't know how many are in progress worldwide right now, but it's a wide range of folks looking at how can they get in and make the vehicles as safe as could be made if you just had a computer driving the car instead of a fallible human being.
And again, these self-driving cars they're not attached to a fixed rail.
No, they're not. It's what people might call a virtual rail. You have all of the mapping, all of the internet connections, all the GPS, and then the other connection with other vehicles, putting you on a track that is better than a fixed rail track.
We have less than a minute to go on the show, actually about 30 seconds, and it seems that I'm hearing a lot of optimism from you as someone who has been in energy consumption and transportation for quite some time, that we actually can truly change. Can we?
I think we can. We started putting on the conferences in 2006 when there was just one prototype, one Nissan Prius, excuse me, a Toyota Prius that was converted into a plug-in. And now you have literally dozens of electric vehicles. Same thing is true with autonomous vehicles. So it really is coming faster than people think. It came faster than I thought it would.
Steve, thank you very much for being with us. That's Steve Marshall from the Center for Advanced Transportation and Energy Solutions. Just amazing stuff. Be sure to go to the website. You're going to learn an awful lot more. We'll see you right here next week on Public Exposure. Take care.